Look around you right now. Think of every ordinary moment you take for granted. During that massive conflict decades ago, day-to-day life was a whirlwind of tension and resolve. Civilians carried scars of fear, hoping each sunrise wouldn't bring more sirens. Troops hurried through rough terrains, facing nights of relentless bombardment. Families struggled with rations, never certain if basic supplies would last another week. Yet in the middle of this chaos, bizarre stories kept unfolding. It's as if each day birthed a new secret or unexpected twist, and many remain buried in dusty archives. Are you ready to hear these hidden details that might leave your heart pounding? Imagine the sky darkening, not from clouds, but from strange balloons drifting across the Pacific. Most folks never realized these floating threats even existed. They carried bombs, launched by desperate hands, hoping the wind would deliver destruction onto distant shores. Hard to believe, but thousands of these silent killers were released. People in far-off forests stumbled on burnt patches of land, with tattered balloon remnants scattered about, never fully grasping what had fallen from above. Frightening, right? Yet that's only one of countless lesser-known realities from that global struggle. Step into the hushed corners of intelligence operations, memos scrawled in code, agents hiding under false names, passing messages in plain sight. This was a time of cunning and trickery. Gadget makers dreamt up all sorts of tools to fool the enemy, like exploding rats. Yes, real rats, stuffed with explosives, designed to sabotage by infiltration. And guess what else was used? Elaborate illusions on battlefield grounds. Fake tanks, dummy planes, entire phantom divisions, complete with loudspeakers blasting the sounds of tanks on the move. Deception became an art form, and it saved countless lives by redirecting enemy focus. It's shocking to imagine how illusions like that could turn the tide. But let's not overlook the role of animals. Horses, dogs, pigeons, and even strange attempts to weaponize bats carried small incendiary bombs. A group of planners figured a cloud of tiny mammals might cause unstoppable fires in enemy cities. Does that sound too wild to be true? That's how frantic and experimental people got. Meanwhile, trained dogs rushed across minefields, risking their lives to sniff out danger. Pigeons, carrying crucial messages inside little tubes attached to their legs, soared through gunfire to bring vital intel back to headquarters. And it often worked. These fragile creatures stood between success and failure in many battles. Now consider the vast influence of signals and cryptography. Rooms full of code breakers worked day and night, their eyes glued to cryptic lines of text. They never touched the front lines, but they opened secret windows into enemy plans. They cracked complicated ciphers that seemed impossible to solve, helping generals anticipate moves before they happened. Some breakthroughs came from brilliant mathematicians who had never fired a bullet in their lives. Through eureka moments, entire naval fleets moved to intercept incoming threats at just the right time. It's mind-boggling to think how bits of data, disguised by twisted letters, guided events that shaped history. Ever heard of soldiers hitching rides on gliders to storm enemy territory silently? That was real. Dozens packed into flimsy crafts that had no engines, just towed behind a plane, then released for stealth landings. Imagine the terror. Once released, there's no turning back. The pilot had one shot at a somewhat safe landing, usually amid machine gun fire or behind enemy lines. Soldiers emerged from these silent wings, fighting bravely with limited gear. Too many never made it. Yet these operations persisted because they offered an edge. The element of surprise. It took nerve and sheer will to ride those gliders into darkness. Think about the frantic search for new technology. Scientists raced to invent radar systems, jet engines, and advanced weaponry faster than the other side. Every breakthrough felt like a potential game changer. Microwave radar, for instance, allowed pilots to spot enemy aircraft hidden by clouds. This advantage shifted dogfights in the sky. Then there were early steps toward computing machines that could process data at unimaginable speeds for that era. These prototypes paved the way for future innovations that power our modern world. It's astonishing how war can accelerate tech leaps, some leading to good, others leading to terrifying possibilities. But it wasn't just about hardware or bombs. Gripping changes happened in factories and offices. Nations churned out tanks, bullets, uniforms, and planes at breakneck speed, reorganizing entire economies just for war production. Workers, men and women, showed up daily, often with minimal breaks, driven by fear and patriotism. Many never got recognized for their grueling labor. They stood over molten steel, hammered rivets into towering battleships, and packed crates of supplies destined for unknown shores. This might sound cold or mechanical, but those behind-the-scenes efforts were as crucial as any frontline charge. Without them, armies would be starved of supplies in weeks. The battlefield also had its unexpected alliances. Some countries that seemed distant or neutral provided crucial support behind the scenes, whether in raw materials or strategic positioning. Meanwhile, smaller nations found themselves torn between superpowers, forced to make choices that could define their future. Deals were brokered in secret, with leaders gambling on who might triumph. Some pacts got exposed after the war, others remain a mystery, locked in government files. And while the headlines mostly spoke of huge armies clashing, these quieter maneuvers in remote regions could shift entire theaters of war. It's a chilling reminder that diplomacy often unfolds in the dark. Propaganda raged across radio waves and posters plastered on every wall. People were bombarded with slogans urging them to fight on or describing the enemy as inhuman monsters. In some places, children's picture books carried hidden messages about loyalty and sacrifice. In others, popular songs were reworded to boost morale. Even cartoons showed political messages, fueling national pride or scorn. This subtle shaping of minds was as potent as any weapon. When you see old footage of cheering crowds, remember that a steady drip of carefully crafted propaganda led to a certain mood. It's unsettling how the mind can be steered with repeated phrases and stirring images. Have you heard about the fearless pilots who flew cargo planes over rough mountain ranges to deliver supplies? Some routes were so dangerous they were nicknamed Sky Roads of No Return. Crews faced brutal weather, limited oxygen, and ever-present threats of enemy fighters. Yet they pressed on, load after load, ensuring remote bases got food, ammo, and medical packs. Countless flights crashed, swallowed by towering peaks or crashing into icy waters. These stories rarely appear in big headlines, yet the success of major campaigns hinged on these unsung supply missions. Real lives, real bravery, overshadowed by more famous battles in history books. In the swirling fog of it all, entire communities faced destruction. Villages turned to rubble, with families forced to run. Refugees crossed borders clutching children and a few precious belongings. Disease spread in cramped camps, and many had no idea if they'd see their old homes again. Some tried to maintain hope, others felt only despair. Meanwhile, letters from the front lines arrived sporadically, sometimes months late, sometimes never at all, leaving mothers, fathers, and siblings in agonizing limbo. The emotional burden was staggering. Civilians bore heavy trauma, much of which was never properly treated. Scars lingered for decades. There were also unusual cultural shifts. For instance, a certain soda brand we take for granted today started out because foreign plants couldn't get shipments from overseas due to blockades. Factories improvised new formulas to keep business going. This kind of adaptation happened across countless industries. Clothing factories made uniforms. Typewriter companies switched to making rifles. Toy manufacturers pivoted to producing bomb sights. The entire notion of normal changed overnight. Even film studios churned out morale-boosting reels and training videos. Entertainers visited the troops, performing in remote camps under the threat of air raids. The morale factor was huge. Laughter or music offered a tiny break from gloom and doom. Don't forget the medical front. Doctors struggled with severe wounds on a scale they had never imagined. Blood transfusions became more advanced. Field hospitals popped up near front lines, and fast-moving medics transported injured soldiers from hot zones. Antibiotics were still considered cutting edge, but they saved countless lives from infection. Nurses risked their safety to tend to the wounded in bunkers or on hospital ships, constantly threatened by submarine attacks. The resilience of these medics was astonishing. They worked around the clock, stitching broken bodies back together, comforting those who couldn't be saved, and never losing their drive to help. Their stories often get overshadowed, but they're nothing short of heroic. Then you had code names for missions that sound almost comical now, like labeling an enormous invasion with a playful word. These names were more than just labels. They helped hide true intentions behind mundane or vague terms. Soldiers got used to hearing code names whispered in tents, repeated in typed messages, or shared in top-secret briefings. Each name represented a massive, life-or-death undertaking. The gravity behind these code names can hit hard when you realize they often meant tens of thousands of troops would be on the move. This interplay between secrecy and unstoppable force created a surreal atmosphere. One misstep and entire plans could collapse. And the intelligence war included double agents. Some individuals fed false information to one side while secretly working for the other. They used coded phrases in radio broadcasts, sometimes reading certain lines from a weather report as a secret signal. In an era without instant messaging, these clever illusions had enormous impact. Governments poured resources into disinformation campaigns, creating layers upon layers of tricks. Even generals could be fooled, positioning troops where the enemy wasn't. Entire battles were won or lost because a single spy relayed a crucial detail at the right or wrong time. It's maddening to think how fragile victory was. All the while, families at home tried to keep morale high. They wrote letters filled with optimism. "We'll get through this," even if bombs had just shaken their neighborhoods. Kids drew crayon pictures of soldiers and pinned them to walls. People clung to small celebrations, like birthdays, despite blackouts and ration lines. Some communities grew victory gardens in every spare patch of dirt, hoping to supplement meager food rations with fresh vegetables. The unity in those times was powerful, yet overshadowed by a constant sense of dread. One never knew when a siren might wail or a dreaded telegram might arrive with bad news. Suffering took on many forms. People of certain backgrounds faced persecution, uprooted from their homes for no reason but prejudice. Others were forced into labor, building roads, bridges, or war machinery under inhumane conditions. Around the world, hidden prisons and camps existed in the shadows. Grim stories of human rights violations abound, some known, many still unknown. Documents get declassified every so often, revealing more shocking details. The deeper you look, the more you realize how widespread the terror was. And yet, through it all, humans found ways to cope, to protect each other, to fight back in small or big ways. The scale of global mobilization was astounding. From sprawling tank factories to tiny huts in remote jungles, the war touched nearly every corner of the planet. There were Arctic convoys struggling through icy seas to deliver aid, stealth missions in desert dunes, and long marches across mountain passes. Soldiers wrote diaries that mentioned extremes of climate, scorching sun by day, freezing nights in foxholes. They worried about disease and malnutrition as much as gunfire. Picture how tough that must have been. Lugging heavy packs, your feet blistered and bleeding, each step filled with anxiety about hidden snipers. It wasn't just about exchanging bullets. It was about surviving elements that showed no mercy. And then there were those day-to-day oddities that soldiers and civilians encountered. Radio broadcasts that suddenly cut out, leaving everyone in eerie silence. Mysterious lights flickering on coastlines, possibly enemy ships or subs. Strange rumors spread like wildfire among troops. "I heard we're moving out next week," only to find out it was all speculation. Meanwhile, black markets thrived under the table, providing coffee, sugar, or silk stockings at outrageous prices. People became experts at bartering, trading cigarettes or chocolates for small favors. A peculiar sub-economy flourished, operating in the cracks of official wartime regulation. Across the oceans, entire flotillas of submarines prowled for enemy cargo ships. Crews on those subs lived in cramped steel tubes, sometimes for weeks on end, seldom seeing daylight. The psychological toll was high, hot bunking in shifts, stale air, and the constant fear of depth charges raining down from above. A single lucky hit from an enemy destroyer could turn the submarine into a steel coffin. Yet many kept returning to these missions, trusting in their boat and each other. That unity under extreme conditions forged bonds that only those who've experienced it can truly understand. In the skies, bomber crews faced flak exploding around them, peppering their aircraft with shrapnel. The sound of engines roared in their ears, while oxygen masks kept them breathing in the thin air at high altitude. Some missions had heartbreakingly high casualty rates. Engines could fail, or a single bullet might hit a fuel tank. Still, these crews pressed on, fueled by a sense of duty and the hope of protecting their loved ones back home. Scenes of returning bombers, holes in the fuselage, wounded men on board were too common. Yet they celebrated any safe landing with silent gratitude or exhausted cheers. Amid all the turmoil, acts of compassion glimmered. Soldiers sharing food with hungry locals, medics treating enemy wounded when no one else was around, prisoners of war forging friendships that defied official hatred. Stories of shared humanity pop up in diaries and letters. Some soldiers wrote about singing carols on Christmas Eve, even if the next morning they'd be trading gunfire again. In those small gestures, you see the raw core of what it means to be human, a flicker of empathy, even in the darkest hour. It's a reminder that beyond the uniforms and flags, people are just people, wanting to survive and maybe find a shred of hope. Could any of that have been predicted before it all erupted? Probably not in such detail. The scale, the horror, the ingenuity, they all blended into a reality that overshadowed everyday life for years. Even now, so many truths stay concealed in personal diaries, restricted archives, or fading memories. Some participants rarely spoke of it, preferring to bury the pain. Others tried to warn future generations, but time erodes these warnings. Yet the hidden details remain, like silent specters reminding us that this was no simple narrative. It involved cunning, heartbreak, fleeting triumphs, and horrifying pitfalls. At every turn, there's another revelation waiting to stun you. Think of all the times you've passed a veteran on the street, maybe not realizing they once navigated these extremes, or the old photograph in a grandparent's drawer, showing them as a wide-eyed recruit. Behind every image and every medal are stories that might shock or inspire. The conflict was so immense that no single person could ever witness it all. For every known headline, there are countless subplots that shape the final outcome. And that's the real kicker. One war, so many angles, so many secrets, so many small moments that collectively change the course of the world. And that's how it all continues, lurking in the background of family histories, overshadowed by sensational main events. Books and documentaries might give us a glimpse, but there's still so much lurking beneath the surface. This is only the start of pulling back that curtain. The unheralded feats of bravery, the hidden acts of desperation, the strange alliances, the near-miraculous escapes, they're all there. One thread leads to another, and before you know it, you're staring at a chain reaction that spanned the globe. So if you think you've heard it all about that massive conflict, watch out. It might surprise you just how deep this story goes. Picture a dense forest at twilight. Shadows shifting among the tall trees, whispering with the wind. Now imagine a small group of soldiers creeping through the underbrush, silent as ghosts. You might guess they're on reconnaissance, but their purpose is even stranger. They're tracking rumored stashes of hidden cargo, possibly lost supplies, maybe even contraband meant for black markets. In that war-torn era, tire supply lines were riddled with theft and secret deals, so specialized teams had to track down or protect vital shipments. It's shocking how a few crates of engine parts or medical supplies could tip the balance in a remote battleground. And it wasn't only official forces involved. Local smugglers, resistance fighters, and opportunistic thieves all took part in this shadowy tug of war. While that drama played out on the ground, signals intelligence soared to new heights. Have you heard of traffic analysis? It's when operators examine patterns in enemy radio traffic, not necessarily decoding messages, but noting when and where signals pop up. Even if the transmissions stayed encrypted, you could guess troop movements by the surge of radio chatter in certain sectors. It didn't always require fancy code breaking, just a keen ear and a methodical mind. This subtle strategy sometimes gave generals days of warning before an attack. It feels almost eerie, entire battles triggered or avoided thanks to patterns in the static-laden airwaves. Invisible signals shaped destinies, while most folks never knew it was happening. Then there's the jaw-dropping story of camouflage artists who took trickery to the next level. We're not just talking about stripes on a helmet or a greenish uniform. We're talking entire fake ports built out of plywood and canvas to lure bombers away from real docks. Lighting specialists designed decoys that mimicked cityscapes at night, flickering with faint street lamps, so high-flying enemy planes would drop bombs on empty fields. This elaborate show of illusions saved countless lives. Imagine how strange it must have felt if you were one of the stagehands, painting faux buildings by day, rigging lights by night, knowing it could be a matter of life or death. Surreal, right? And what about code talkers? Many people know the basics. Groups of indigenous speakers used their languages to transmit messages that stumped enemy eavesdroppers. But the details are staggering. In some operations, code talkers rattled off commands at lightning speed, while enemy cryptologists simply couldn't crack the pattern. Government officials initially doubted the idea, but once these transmissions proved secure, they became a hidden ace in the hole. Yet after the war, many of these heroes returned home with little fanfare. Their contributions, classified for years, went underappreciated, despite playing a crucial role in major offensives. Their stories only began to emerge decades later, a poignant reminder that not all heroes get statues or ribbons. Ever heard of the phenomenon where entire armies used narcotics to cope or gain an edge? Some leaders authorized stimulants for pilots to stay awake on long missions. Others quietly encouraged soldiers to keep going despite fatigue and fear by handing out certain pills. Morale boosters, they called them, though we now know they were basically strong amphetamines. Meanwhile, on the Axis side, rumors swirled that certain frontline units received rations laced with substances to numb their nerves before intense combat. This might sound unnerving, but the reality of that conflict often blurred moral lines. Commanders did what they felt necessary to maintain an edge, yet the aftermath for many veterans included addiction or lingering health problems that were never properly addressed. Meanwhile, all across Europe, resistance groups carried out sabotage missions under constant threat of torture or death if caught. Ordinary citizens risked everything to blow up train tracks, slip coded messages to Allied contacts, or hide fugitives in their attics. Young couriers rode bicycles at night, carrying letters stuffed in the lining of their jackets, heart-pounding at every checkpoint. These brave individuals often had no military background. They just felt driven to fight oppression in any way they could. Some wrote diaries that historians only discovered much later, describing anxiety and hunger and that flicker of hope that someday things might change. Their sense of purpose kept them going, even as neighborhoods were razed and neighbors disappeared. Then there were bizarre experiments carried out in secret labs. On one side, geniuses worked on early rockets that would soon pave the way for space travel, though the immediate purpose was to strike distant targets. On the other side, twisted medical research took place on unwilling subjects, leading to horrors beyond imagining. Some governments pushed science to extremes, hoping for a quick advantage, crossing ethical lines with no remorse. Documents describing these projects sometimes stayed sealed for decades. Even when released, they often got overshadowed by bigger headlines. Yet they remain a haunting part of that era, revealing how desperate times can unravel our sense of morality in pursuit of an upper hand. We should also recall how unpredictably nature shaped events. Fierce storms sank entire convoys that might have otherwise changed the course of a battle. Dense fog grounded air fleets that were ready for crucial raids, forcing them to wait while the enemy regrouped. In some campaigns, muddy roads trapped tanks, leaving them vulnerable to artillery fire. Troops trying to cross rivers found themselves battling raging waters as much as enemy gunfire. That conflict wasn't just humans at war with each other. Sometimes the environment itself became an unforgiving opponent. Commanders planned elaborate maneuvers, only to see them crumble under freak weather events. Frustrating? Absolutely. But it also led to improvised strategies that stand out as testaments to human adaptability. Can you picture giant floating harbors built from hollow concrete blocks and steel spans, hauled across the sea to create makeshift ports where no port existed? These astonishing structures were essential for launching major invasions. Without them, heavy vehicles and supplies couldn't be offloaded quickly on hostile shores. It was engineering brilliance under insane pressure. Workers built these things round the clock, kept them top secret, and then towed them across perilous waters. One miscalculation, and the entire project could sink. But these floating platforms ended up a huge success and saved countless lives by shortening supply lines. It's a marvel of what people can achieve with sheer determination when the stakes are that high. In another corner of the conflict, people turned to signals hidden in music. Resistance radio stations broadcast coded tunes, where certain songs at certain times meant, "The landing is in 3 days," or "We need an airdrop tonight." Occupying forces might notice the same songs played repeatedly, but that alone wasn't enough to crack the code. It gave everyday radio shows an underground twist. Listeners might tap their feet to a catchy tune, while partisans heard a secret signal. The creativity was astounding. You never knew if a harmless cooking show or a brief poem on the airwaves held the key to sabotage or rescue missions. And while we're discussing sabotage, let's not forget the infiltration of morale. Saboteurs sometimes targeted troop morale by spreading rumors that rations had been contaminated or that their leaders were negotiating surrender. This psychological warfare often led to confusion and panic, especially in isolated units with poor communication. Soldiers who overheard such rumors might lose focus or question their leadership. Disinformation traveled fast in an era where you couldn't hop online to verify facts. A rumor could linger for weeks, undermining unity and fueling mistrust. Indeed, the war wasn't just about capturing territory. It was a fierce battle for hearts and minds in every corner of the globe. On the other side of that coin, entire factories of propaganda churned out leaflets dropped from planes over enemy lines. These leaflets offered safe conduct passes, promising humane treatment if an enemy soldier surrendered. Some featured cartoons mocking the opposing leadership. Others contained carefully selected news snippets designed to shake the confidence of frontline troops. Did it work? Sometimes yes, sometimes no. But it was a powerful reminder of how crucial it was to shape perception. In some areas, locals scooped up these leaflets, not because they wanted to surrender, but because paper was in short supply. They'd reuse them for notes or packaging. Little ironies like that abounded. Far from the front, entire industries refitted their assembly lines. You'd walk into a factory, once known for making bicycles or children's wagons, only to find hundreds of workers now producing artillery shells. Government mandates pushed companies to shift focus almost overnight. The staff had to learn new processes and adapt to new machinery. Accidents were common, safety was often an afterthought, and speed trumped everything else. Lives were lost even on home soil due to industrial mishaps. Yet these factories churned out mountains of material that kept armies fighting. It's a hidden battlefield in itself. No bullets flying, but enormous pressure and real danger all the same. While that happened, entire convoys of ships zigzagged across the Atlantic to dodge submarine attacks. The navies organized these ships into tight formations, guarded by destroyers and corvettes. In cramped quarters below deck, merchant mariners worked long shifts, aware that a torpedo could strike at any moment. The tension was unrelenting. Some convoys suffered heavy losses, others slipped through undetected. Those who survived repeated runs developed superstitions, like never whistling on deck or wearing a certain lucky charm. It's as if every crossing was a roll of the dice, with few illusions of guaranteed safety. Despite that, they kept sailing because supply was everything. Not everything was about brute force or cunning sabotage. There were also sweeping cultural changes. Women took on roles traditionally held by men, flying planes from factories to airfields, working as mechanics, welding hulls in shipyards. While some societies resisted these shifts, necessity overruled prejudice in many cases. Women proved they could handle the work under extreme pressure. They juggled ration coupons, child rearing, and grueling shifts at industrial plants. Once the conflict ended, many were asked, sometimes forced, to step aside, returning jobs to men. Yet the seeds of change had been planted. In the aftermath, it became harder to ignore their capabilities, setting the stage for future battles over equality. Have you considered the thousands of war correspondents who risked their lives just to send back a few paragraphs of news? Cameras bulky as small suitcases, film reels that had to be smuggled out of combat zones, and constant censorship overshadowed their efforts. Some reporters lost their lives when the front lines shifted unexpectedly. Others were taken prisoner because their footage might reveal sensitive info. Yet the world craved news. People in cafes back home pored over the latest headlines, searching for hints of victory or signs that loved ones might be okay. Meanwhile, censors with black markers removed any details they deemed risky, sometimes leaving entire paragraphs unreadable. Still, many mysteries remain. For example, stashes of stolen artwork vanished into hidden bunkers, only to resurface decades later in dusty barns or distant vaults. Precious paintings, sculptures, and artifacts changed hands under suspicious circumstances. Some of these lost treasures remain missing even now, fueling rumors of hidden Nazi bunkers or secret underground trains loaded with gold. Treasure hunters occasionally emerge, claiming they've found new leads. Often, it's a wild goose chase. But the sheer scope of art and valuables displaced during that period was mind-blowing, and the search continues in certain circles to this day. In remote theaters, entire divisions were cut off by monsoon rains or mountain passes. They had to rely on airdrops for food, ammo, and medical supplies. Paratroopers dropped crates, sometimes drifting miles off target, leaving a unit hungry or underarmed. Local guides led small expeditions to retrieve precious cargo stuck on cliffsides or tangled in jungle canopies. Survival often hinged on these nerve-wracking deliveries. Soldiers trapped in such places sometimes joked that they'd become part-time explorers, hacking through vines and navigating swamps just to get a few canisters of bandages. It was a war against the terrain as much as the enemy. Then there's the emotional fallout we rarely talk about. Frontline soldiers returning home so exhausted and traumatized that they couldn't slip back into normal life. Psychiatric care was in its infancy, and many were simply told to shake it off. Nightmares haunted their sleep, loud noises triggered flashbacks, and families felt helpless. Some veterans ended up homeless, while others bottled up their trauma until it leaked out in angry outbursts or depression. The war might have ended on paper, but for them, it raged on in their minds and memories. This silent struggle was often brushed aside by societies eager to move forward, but the scars remained. For many, the war ended with enormous celebrations in city streets, flags waving, kisses shared with total strangers, ticker tape drifting from tall buildings. But behind every moment of joy were quiet tears for those who never came back, for the missing relatives, and for entire towns flattened. Some survivors walked through rubble-strewn roads, searching for something, anything, to reclaim from their old life. Some found a scorched photograph or a half-broken cup, all they had left of their past. They faced a new world order, battered but determined to rebuild. Yet even in that rush to rebuild, countless stories slipped through the cracks, overshadowed by the bigger headlines. Whispers of these hidden pieces of history still echo in diaries, official documents, or the memories of older generations. Each fragment reveals new angles on how that war spread into every aspect of life. The more you look, the more you realize how easily entire episodes can vanish from public memory. Official narratives tend to streamline events into neat timelines, battles, and major conferences, but the truth is far messier. Stolen possessions, coded signals in lullabies, bizarre secret weapons, feats of engineering that defy logic, it's all part of that vast, ferocious chapter of humanity. And so much of it stays tucked away, waiting to be uncovered by those curious enough to ask the right questions. That era wasn't just about grand speeches or famous generals. It was also about the farmer who helped a stranded pilot hiding in his barn, the factory worker who learned to solder under flickering lights, the courier who pedaled through enemy checkpoints, heart pounding at every turn, the mother who listened to distant artillery at night, praying for her children's safety. These individual threads might not make front-page headlines, but collectively, they wove a saga of endurance and sacrifice. The stories come from every corner, urban or rural, battlefield or workshop, men or women, young or old. Each voice adds a layer of complexity that defies simple explanation. No matter how many books you read or old newsreels you watch, you can never fully grasp the magnitude of that global upheaval. But these hidden details give us a raw peek behind the curtain. They reveal how many pieces had to shift, logistically, culturally, psychologically, to keep that war machine turning. they also highlight the many leaps and stumbles that shaped our world. Perhaps that's why these details fascinate people, because they speak to the gritty reality behind the big headlines. They remind us that history is shaped by more than just leaders and formal declarations. It's also shaped by the hush of a midnight raid, the grin of a code talker sending out an impossible-to-break message, or the hush that falls over a factory floor when a new hush-hush project begins. And that's how the fabric of that conflict continues to astonish us, one overlooked fact at a time. We keep finding new angles that force us to rethink what we assumed was common knowledge. We discover that everyday objects, like a canteen or a pair of boots, carried stories of triumph or tragedy. We learn that entire strategies depended on deception, or that a single error in weather forecasting shifted entire fleets in another direction. Each new reveal shows just how precarious the balance was, how easily fate could sway from one side to the other. And if you thought the war ended cleanly with neat lines on a map, keep your eyes open, because the real story is far from tidy, and it extends beyond the final battle in ways we're still unraveling. Have you ever looked at a vintage photograph of a ravaged city, buildings crumbled, streets full of rubble, and wondered how everyday people managed to keep going? It wasn't just about surviving air raids. It was the countless smaller battles against hunger, cold, and hopelessness. In many places, entire neighborhoods turned into tight-knit communities, sharing scarce supplies and watching over each other's kids. Some families bunked in cramped cellars with strangers because their own homes were destroyed. Children picked up bits of shrapnel, unaware of the danger, treating them like collectibles. It sounds shocking now, but for them, it was part of daily life. There was a strange mixture of fear and resilience pulsing in those battered streets. Meanwhile, entire units on the front were rotated back to rest and refit, only to find villages and towns unrecognizable. Soldiers sometimes visited their parents, discovering that the family home was gone, bombed out, or seized. Others found their loved ones had fled to the countryside, leaving behind hasty notes on the door, if at all. In the swirl of changing front lines, communication broke down often. Letters took weeks or months to reach home, if they arrived at all. In some cases, mail was deliberately censored or destroyed by occupying forces who saw personal correspondence as a security risk. That left countless families in the dark about each other's fate, fueling anxiety that wouldn't let them sleep. And yet, out of this chaos, entire networks of improvised relief emerged. Church basements stored crates of donated clothes, while volunteer nurses roamed makeshift camps, doing what they could with limited medical supplies. Some local doctors ran clinics using the faint glow of oil lamps because electricity was gone. Simple cough syrups or ointments became treasures. Farmers who had anything extra, milk, eggs, vegetables, shared them, sometimes at great personal risk, because black market dealings could lead to severe penalties if discovered. Imagine the relief of getting hold of a few eggs after weeks of watery soup. Small acts of kindness shone like tiny lights in a sea of darkness. While these communities struggled, leaders engaged in massive strategic planning behind closed doors. High-ranking officers pored over maps dotted with red and blue pins. They argued about which offensive to launch next, which ally to trust, which front needed reinforcements. Diplomatic envoys slipped across borders with sealed letters for secret negotiations. Allies sometimes argued bitterly over how to allocate scarce resources. One nation might demand more aid, while another insisted on a priority for a different front. Tensions simmered even among friends, masked by carefully worded announcements to the public. Meanwhile, on paper, alliances seemed rock solid, but in reality they were riddled with unspoken distrust and jockeying for post-war influence. Propaganda broadcasts hammered on. They assured citizens that victory was near, or that enemies were teetering on collapse. Some announcements were outright fabrications, designed to keep morale high or to confuse the opposition. In rural areas, people often relied on these broadcasts as their primary source of news. Yet rumor and word of mouth often overshadowed official statements. You'd hear farmers whisper, "I heard the front is only 20 miles away," or "So-and-so's cousin got a letter saying the fighting is much worse than they admit." Confusion reigned because the flow of accurate information was so spotty. People clung to any shred of credible data, never fully sure what was truth or manipulation. In the thick of this, new weapons rolled off assembly lines at astonishing rates. Engineers made incremental improvements to tanks, aircraft, and artillery almost monthly. This arms race meant that a fighter plane from early in the war might be hopelessly outclassed by models introduced just a year later. Crews had to adapt quickly, learning how to handle fresh equipment while under fire. Manuals were printed hastily, sometimes full of errors, leaving the operators guessing. Repair technicians found themselves grappling with complex machinery they'd never seen before. If they were lucky, they'd salvage parts from damaged vehicles. If not, entire squadrons might be grounded or entire tank regiments sidelined. So the push for innovative designs also led to frantic training sessions, tricky supply chains, and the risk of fielding untested prototypes. And it wasn't just vehicles. Fortifications evolved too. Concrete bunkers that once seemed impregnable found themselves vulnerable to newer, heavier explosives. Anti-tank ditches were defeated by bridging equipment. Barbed wire entanglements meant to slow down infantry were blasted away by specialized charges. Each defensive measure seemed to spark a new countermeasure, spiraling into a cycle of escalation. This rapid evolution of tactics and technology forced every side to stay on its toes. Manuals became outdated almost as soon as they were issued. Soldiers joked that they had to learn something new every week, and it wasn't far from the truth. Some historians talk about large-scale battles as the war's defining events, but local skirmishes often had a ripple effect. Perhaps a small force managed to seize a bridge intact, speeding the advance of an entire army group, or a ragtag band of guerrillas derailed an enemy supply train, halting an offensive for days. In the grand scheme, these moments might be footnotes in official histories, yet they shaped the momentum in crucial ways. Soldiers on the ground knew it well. They'd say, "We just need to hold that hill for one more night," or, "If we lose that crossing, we lose the entire sector." The fates of huge campaigns sometimes hinged on a handful of determined defenders or attackers. While front lines surged back and forth, think of the war's effect on farmland. Fields were churned up by tank tracks, bomb craters, and trenches, leaving the soil scarred. Harvests dropped. Livestock died or were commandeered by occupying troops. Farmers who stayed found themselves working with fewer tools or no fuel for machinery. Some used horses or oxen to plow again, if they could keep them from being taken by the military. Malnutrition crept in. People foraged for wild berries, mushrooms, even acorns to grind into flour. Bread became a precious commodity in some regions, and black market loaves soared in price. Meanwhile, city dwellers sometimes ventured into the countryside to barter whatever they had, maybe a watch or a family heirloom, for a sack of potatoes. Food was literally a currency, traded in back alleys and secret market stalls. Nations also tried strange economic tactics. Some printed money endlessly to fund war production, causing runaway inflation. Others hoarded gold or valuable materials, trying to secure a post-war advantage. Blockades aimed to starve out entire countries, crippling their ability to fight. Smuggling rings popped up, ferrying goods across borders under the cover of darkness. It was risky business. If a smuggler got caught, the punishment could be brutal, but the lure of profit, or simply the desperation to feed one's family, propelled many to take the risk. In these hidden economies, everything had a price: fuel, medication, a forged travel permit, even intelligence about troop movements. On top of that, entire colonies around the globe were pulled into the conflict. People in far-flung territories were conscripted, sometimes without fully understanding the cause. They donned uniforms, traveled across seas, and fought in foreign lands. Many had little say in these matters. Colonial powers demanded manpower and resources. This sparked resentment and raised questions about independence. In some parts of Africa or Asia, volunteers and draftees alike found themselves side by side with men from entirely different cultures, forging unexpected friendships or facing prejudice. After returning home, many began to question the old colonial order. Seeds of future revolutions were planted in these war experiences, often overlooked by mainstream histories that focus on Europe or the Pacific. In prisoner of war camps, life was a constant negotiation between monotony and fear. In some camps, detainees found ways to maintain morale, organizing amateur theater shows, building makeshift gyms, or cobbling together radios from scrap. In others, conditions were dire with minimal rations and brutal treatment. Red Cross parcels, if they arrived, were lifelines of nutrition and news. Prisoners struck up friendships that spanned nationality, bridging the animosities of the battlefield. Escape attempts became legendary, like tunnels dug by hand or disguises that let prisoners walk right out the front gate. But for every dramatic success, there were countless failures, leading to severe reprisals. The psychological strain of captivity left many men scarred long after the guns fell silent. And in the murk of all these struggles, there was still room for cultural expression. Some soldiers sang songs from their childhood as they marched. Others swapped jokes in cramped barracks to keep spirits up. Artists sketched powerful scenes in notepads, a comrade dozing on a crate, a distant line of tanks, or a bombed cathedral's silhouette. Poets scribbled verses in diaries, capturing the fleeting moments between life and death. Even in times of ruin, creativity found ways to bloom, though much of it went unnoticed until discovered post-war. Imagine stumbling upon a dusty notebook decades later, reading raw, heartfelt lines from a soldier who didn't survive. That's an emotional jolt, showing that beneath the uniforms, they were humans trying to process unimaginable stress. Large propaganda films also dominated movie screens, where the population wasn't too close to active fighting. Governments used cinema to boost morale or demonize the enemy. Lines to enter these theaters often wound around city blocks, providing a brief distraction from air raid sirens and bleak headlines. Some reels portrayed heroic pilots or noble sailors triumphing over adversity. Others were flat-out fantasies, portraying the enemy as bumbling fools. Audiences might laugh, cheer, or cry, temporarily forgetting that they had to emerge into darkness, where danger lurked. Film studios churned this content out quickly, hoping to shape public sentiment. Critics sometimes saw it as shallow propaganda, but for many viewers it was an escape from grim reality, if only for an hour or two. Back on the front, the use of specialized maps was crucial. Certain topographical details, like swampy ground or steep ridges, could save or doom an advancing army. Cartographers worked feverishly to update charts as front lines shifted. Pilots took aerial photos, risking enemy flak, so analysts on the ground could spot new fortifications or changes in terrain. A single error on a map might send a battalion into a quagmire. Soldiers relied heavily on these documents, often planning nighttime forays with only a flashlight beam to guide them. Land navigation in the dark under stress is no joke, especially when one wrong step could trigger a landmine. This balance between accurate intelligence and high-risk data collection was vital, yet rarely talked about outside military circles. And then there were the hidden cat-and-mouse games at sea. Armed merchant cruisers disguised themselves as innocent freighters, only to reveal heavy guns when unsuspecting enemy ships closed in. Submarines lurked beneath the waves, hoping to detect enemy convoys via the faint hum of engines. Some naval engagements lasted mere minutes. A sudden strike, an explosion, then silence. Survivors floated on makeshift rafts, waiting for rescue that might never come. The ocean became a grave for many who never set foot on a battlefield. That lonely fight on the high seas contributed massively to the war's outcome, strangling supply routes or keeping them open. It was an invisible war for those on land, but a brutal reality for thousands of sailors. In that era, the lines between civilian and combatant often blurred. Entire populations were threatened, bombed, or forced into labor. Young men might be drafted straight out of university. Women replaced them in classrooms or offices back home. The older generation tried to keep some semblance of stability, perhaps running small businesses where possible, or tending community gardens to feed hungry neighbors. Priests, rabbis, and other spiritual leaders offered comfort when they could, though they themselves were often exhausted. Some turned to faith as a coping mechanism, praying for peace or for a loved one's safe return. Yet just as many lost faith, unable to reconcile the scale of suffering with their beliefs. The spiritual toll was as deep as the physical and mental toll. The deeper you go into these layers, the more you see that history isn't a neat list of battles. It's a tangled story of people just trying to survive each day, with all the oddities, improvisations, and heartbreak that such a gigantic conflict brings. You find surprising stories of collaboration, too. Enemy soldiers might temporarily pause hostilities to share supplies or help wounded after a chance encounter, or opposing medics might exchange gestures of respect on a battlefield littered with casualties. These moments might be fleeting, but they reveal a shared humanity beneath all the propaganda and commands. In hidden corners, scientists rushed to perfect projects meant to unleash devastation on an unimaginable scale. At the same time, others tried to develop better protective measures: stronger helmets, more effective gas masks, improved medical techniques. It was a constant race. You had breakthroughs that would one day revolutionize science, like early research into nuclear fission, and you also had some that would soon be forgotten, overshadowed by larger events. Each lab had its own drama, as brilliant minds clashed over theories or ethics, some forging ahead despite moral qualms. Documents from these labs sometimes disappeared, fueling conspiracy theories even long after the war ended. Groups of refugees moved en masse, forming long, winding lines along the roads. They carried children, old relatives, and whatever belongings they could strap to carts or bicycles. Soldiers might pass them by, sometimes offering what little aid they could, sometimes ignoring them to maintain strict orders. These caravans often had no clear destination, just a desperate hope of finding safety somewhere out of the path of advancing armies. Disease spread quickly in these crowds, along with fear and rumors. But there was also camaraderie, strangers helping strangers, guiding the weak, sharing bits of food. These journeys across battered landscapes remain some of the war's most heartrending images, yet they rarely receive the spotlight in typical accounts focused on military heroics. In all of this upheaval, black market deals sometimes made or broke communities. A single truckload of penicillin could save countless lives, but might be sold at outrageous prices, fueling resentment among those who couldn't afford it. Generals sometimes turned a blind eye if such deals kept their troops supplied. Some unscrupulous figures profited heavily from the war, living in luxury even as others starved. This economic underbelly shows how any crisis can create opportunities for exploitation. Meanwhile, everyday people scrambled for basics: soap, matches, cooking oil, often paying with valuables or precious heirlooms. You can imagine how that desperation grated on people's spirits, sowing seeds of post-war frustration and distrust toward any form of authority. Through all these layers, food shortages, hidden operations, shifting alliances, brutal fighting, and surprising acts of kindness, we see how the war wove itself into the very core of life. Nobody remained unaffected. Even those in so-called neutral nations felt the impact through trade restrictions, refugee influxes, or pressure from one side or another to pick a stance. Embassies turned into tense zones of diplomatic dance. Spies tried to recruit informants. Sabotage teams eyed factories that supplied one faction or served another. No corner of the world truly escaped the war's long reach. Not even remote islands used as outposts or listening stations. And so the story of that global war grows more intricate with each fact revealed, sometimes inspiring awe at human resilience, sometimes sparking horror at the depths of cruelty. When you look past the grand speeches and iconic images, you find ordinary individuals standing in extraordinary circumstances. You find heartbreak, sacrifice, bravery, betrayal, and invention all mixed together. These layers of truth keep surprising us, showing that the conflict was so much more than just battles on a timeline. It was and is a sprawling reality that touched everything from farmland to city streets, from labs to living rooms, leaving behind traces we're still uncovering. Think back to the silent nights on the home front, when blackout curtains covered every window. People fumbled with flashlights or candles just to move around after dusk, worried that even a flicker of light might guide enemy bombers overhead. In some cities, streetlights were switched off entirely, creating an eerie darkness that locals had never known before. Drivers painted their headlights with special black paint, leaving only a narrow slit to illuminate the road. Despite these precautions, collisions increased, and it wasn't unusual to hear screeching tires and crashes in the gloom. Children sometimes laughed at the novelty, inventing games in the pitch-dark streets, not fully grasping the grim reason behind the blackout. Meanwhile, volunteer air raid wardens patrolled neighborhoods, making sure nobody accidentally broke the rules and let light spill out. In a strange way, these measures brought communities together, forging a sense of shared responsibility. But the tension was always there. One small mistake could draw a devastating bombing run. For people on the ground, the nights felt endless. Every hum of an aircraft engine made hearts skip a beat, even if it was just one of their own patrol planes. Thousands of restless nights passed this way, with families huddled in basements or under staircases whenever sirens wailed. Over time, some folks became desensitized to the alarms, while others jumped at any sudden noise, fraying nerves to the breaking point. On the flip side, bomber crews from all sides had their own nightmarish routines. They took off at dusk, flying for hours with limited visibility, guided by rudimentary instruments. Anti-aircraft guns lit up the sky, tracing deadly arcs of fire. Getting lost was a constant worry, especially when heavy cloud cover obscured landmarks and navigation beacons. Radios crackled with coded chatter, but jamming signals often made communication chaotic. A single navigation error might lead a crew miles off course, sometimes dropping payloads on the wrong target or even a friendly position. It wasn't just moral questions haunting these missions. The basic mechanics of surviving night flights posed a huge challenge. For ground defenses, radar systems became indispensable. Crews huddled in radar stations, scanning greenish screens for incoming dots that could signal an enemy formation. Early models were bulky and not always accurate. Operators sometimes struggled to distinguish between real threats and false echoes caused by atmospheric anomalies. Still, when radar worked, it gave defenders precious minutes to scramble fighters or ready anti-aircraft guns. This technological leap made night bombing riskier for the attackers, prompting them to fly higher or choose alternative routes. Meanwhile, scientists kept tweaking the systems, pushing for better range and clarity. The battle in the skies wasn't just about planes and pilots. It was also about the engineers and radar operators locked in a race to refine their tools before the other side caught up. And that's only one slice of the technological surge. On the ground, mines took on new forms: magnetic, pressure-activated, even ones triggered by a simple tripwire. Soldiers had to move carefully, scanning the road ahead, listening for the telltale click that could end everything in a flash. Specialists called sappers, or pioneers, risked their lives defusing these hidden explosives. They crawled on their bellies, gingerly probing the soil with metal detectors or thin rods, praying they wouldn't set off a charge. Some developed nerves of steel, telling themselves that each successful disarm was one more victory over an unseen enemy. But the margin for error was razor thin, and many paid the ultimate price for one slip of the hand. And then we have the fight in the deserts. Under the scorching sun, tanks kicked up massive dust clouds visible for miles. Soldiers coped with oppressive heat by soaking their shirts in whatever water they could find. Supplies had to be trucked in over barren wasteland, often leading to fierce convoy battles. Sand got into everything: weapons, engines, food. Mechanics found themselves stripping down and cleaning equipment more often than they actually got to rest. Meanwhile, nights brought an abrupt chill. Temperatures dropped so sharply that frost could form on metal surfaces. Soldiers in the same day might face heat exhaustion and nighttime hypothermia. It was a seesaw of extremes, testing endurance in ways that few had experienced before. Civilians caught in desert regions adapted as well. Nomadic tribes sometimes found their lifestyles disrupted by moving armies, forced to relocate or ration their grazing areas. Some were coerced into guiding troops through tricky dune systems. Others seized the chance to smuggle or trade with whichever side paid better. This wasn't always about loyalty. Survival often meant striking deals with forces that controlled the water wells or the trade routes. These local alliances shifted with the winds, creating yet another layer of complexity in a war that already spanned oceans and continents. In the mountains, the challenges looked entirely different. Soldiers gasped for thin air at high altitudes, hauling heavy gear over rocky passes. Snow and ice claimed lives just as effectively as bullets. Frostbite left many with permanent injuries, while avalanches could wipe out entire units unexpectedly. Meanwhile, equipment meant for lower elevations often malfunctioned in bitter cold. Engines failed, guns jammed, radio batteries died faster. Mountain warfare required specialized training. Crews practiced climbing and skiing, learning to survive with minimal shelter. Some armies formed elite alpine units, full of men who thrived on the heights, but even they struggled when blizzards or sudden storms roared in. And let's not forget the unique realm of amphibious invasions. Thousands of troops crammed onto landing craft, bobbing in rough surf, waiting for the signal to charge a hostile beach. Sea spray soaked them, nerves wound tight as they braced for the ramp to drop. Once it did, chaos often ensued. Machine gun fire from bunkers, hidden mines just beneath the waves, artillery shells whistling overhead. Waves that looked gentle from a distance could knock soldiers off their feet, dragging them under if they were too loaded down with gear. Some drowned before even reaching dry sand. Others found themselves pinned on the shore with nowhere to hide, forced to dig shallow foxholes in wet sand. In these moments, success or failure hinged on split-second decisions and unbreakable resolve. Meanwhile, far from the beaches, intelligence officers worked round the clock. They pored over spy reports, trying to confirm rumors of new enemy defenses. They analyzed intercepted radio messages, cross-referencing them with aerial photos. Sometimes they got it right, warning an incoming fleet to change course before stumbling into a trap. Other times, misinterpretations led entire battalions into deadly ambushes. Intelligence wasn't just gleaned from coded transmissions. It also came from personal diaries captured from prisoners, messages found on fallen couriers, or local informants who'd glimpsed troop movements. Sorting truth from lies took skill and a healthy dose of caution. One false piece of info could doom thousands. Back in cities still under siege, a different kind of bravery emerged. Doctors and nurses labored in bombed-out hospitals that barely had running water or electricity. They improvised splints from broken furniture, used table salt when medical disinfectants ran low, and reused bandages after boiling them. Patients lined corridors on stretchers, moaning in pain while explosions shook the building. Some medical personnel never left their posts, even when the shells got terrifyingly close. Others set up field hospitals in school basements or even in subway tunnels, turning subterranean spaces into surgical wards. It was a grim testament to human resilience. They clung to hope, staving off infection and saving whoever they could, sometimes under direct threat of enemy fire. And while huge naval battles often grab attention, consider the daily life aboard a single destroyer. Sailors might eat and sleep in cramped quarters, living within arm's reach of torpedoes, depth charges, and massive guns. If a submarine was spotted, the call to battle stations sent everyone sprinting to their assigned posts, adrenaline pumping. Depth charges thundered as they plunged into the ocean depths, hoping to cripple the hidden foe. When the charges went off, the shock waves rattled the hull, sometimes causing leaks or knocking out electrical systems. Sailors never knew if the next explosion might breach the hull entirely. Yet in calmer moments, they swapped jokes, played cards in the galley, and tried to forget how perilous their mission was. That duality, intense danger followed by mundane downtime, marked the rhythm of their existence. Let's also remember the anxious families across every homeland. Mothers, fathers, siblings, and spouses glued to the radio or scanning the newspapers, hoping for a clue about their loved ones. Government bulletins might list units engaged in heavy fighting, and hearts would sink if a familiar regiment appeared on that list. Mail arrived sporadically, sometimes in battered envelopes that had crisscrossed continents. Soldiers tried to keep letters cheerful, avoiding grim details so as not to worry relatives. Parents wrote back with stories of ration lines, cold winters, and prayers for a speedy return. This emotional roller coaster spanned months, years. Every letter was read and reread until the paper wore thin, a small connection to a far-off front where life and death were daily considerations. At the same time, war profiteers thrived. Certain individuals knew how to exploit supply shortages, bartering goods at outrageous prices. Some used political connections to secure juicy contracts, manufacturing subpar equipment for a tidy profit. Soldiers on the front lines might receive boots that fell apart in a week, or rifles prone to jamming. Corruption could hide behind patriotic slogans, and official oversight was often overwhelmed by the sheer scale of production needs. Meanwhile, black market rings swapped contraband, from whiskey to fuel to vital spare parts, siphoning off resources meant for official channels. For every inspiring tale of heroism, there was a darker tale of greed lurking beneath the surface. And if that wasn't enough complexity, you had entire resistance networks forging passports and identity papers. Counterfeit stamps, forged signatures, carefully aged documents. These were the tools for smuggling people out of danger. Jews and other persecuted groups hid in safe houses, aided by brave souls willing to risk their own lives. Gestures of kindness took many forms, like forging ration cards so families wouldn't starve. The forgers lived in constant fear of discovery because one slip could lead to torture, imprisonment, or worse. Yet they persevered, each successful operation a small victory against tyranny. These quiet acts of defiance saved thousands, though each success story was haunted by countless losses. On top of that, entire fields of scientific research soared ahead. Medical researchers tested new antiseptics and operating techniques on the battlefield. Large-scale vaccination campaigns were conducted in certain armies to combat diseases like typhus or cholera. Ships and submarines experimented with sonar technology, gleaning more advanced ways to detect underwater threats. Tanks got thicker armor, planes flew higher and faster, rockets loomed on the horizon. Even nutritional science gained ground, as ration planners searched for diets that kept troops in fighting shape despite limited food sources. It was a whirlwind of trial and error under desperate conditions. Not all experiments were beneficial. Some regimes sanctioned horrific testing on prisoners, pushing beyond any moral boundary. These covert programs ranged from biological warfare trials to chemical exposure tests, often leaving victims with dreadful injuries or illnesses. Documents detailing such atrocities were sometimes burned near the war's end, but whispers and partial evidence emerged later, shocking the world. There's a haunting realization that progress can be twisted when ethics vanish in the face of ambition or hatred. Many of these sins went unpunished for years, hidden behind official silence and destroyed records. Amid the din of guns and bombs, smaller cultural shifts continued. Radio shows, for example, stayed immensely popular when signals weren't jammed. Families tuned in not just for news, but also for lighthearted comedies or music that offered a break from grim reality. Some shows broadcast subtle nods to current events, using coded language that attentive listeners might decode. Others were purely entertainment, giving weary civilians and soldiers a few moments of levity. In cities less affected by direct fighting, dance halls still opened occasionally. People dressed up in their best, eager to forget the war, if only for an evening of swing or waltzing. This contrast, music and dance amid the gloom, feels almost surreal, but it was precisely that yearning for normalcy that kept spirits from shattering. As months turned into years, battle lines shifted drastically. Cities that once felt safe faced sudden invasions. Territories that had been ravaged were liberated, albeit in ruins. Rumors ran rampant. The war will end by Christmas, or a massive secret weapon will change everything. Civilians clung to these whispers, needing something hopeful. Some believed them fervently, others brushed them off as wishful thinking. On the front lines, soldiers grew wearier, longing for a break. In the occupied zones, people quietly prayed for an end, even if it meant more turmoil when powers changed hands. And behind it all, leaders plotted final offensives or last-ditch defenses, jockeying for position in the post-war world they knew was coming. Within that shifting landscape, entire towns found themselves cut off from supply routes. Food shipments stopped, hospitals ran out of bandages, and local officials scrambled to maintain order. Sometimes, improvised peace committees tried to negotiate local truces, hoping to avoid senseless destruction. A few succeeded temporarily, but all too often, larger forces rolled in, ignoring any local arrangements. Hard choices followed: stand and fight, risking annihilation, or surrender and face the uncertain mercy of occupying troops. The moral and emotional toll on civilians caught in such dilemmas can't be overstated. They weren't generals or political figures, just normal people forced to gamble with their lives and property in a colossal game of power. Even for countries that avoided direct combat on their soil, the economic strain was enormous. industries pivoted to produce everything from bullets to ships to special uniforms. Governments issued war bonds, urging citizens to invest their savings, promising repayment if they triumphed. Inflation chewed away at incomes. Luxury goods vanished, replaced by essential items. Certain foods became unobtainable due to blockades or resource prioritization. Citizens lined up for hours to get meager rations of cheese or meat. This collective struggle tightened the sense of unity, but also fueled resentment if people suspected some were profiting unfairly or hoarding goods. And through it all, children kept growing up in that environment. Many didn't know any different, having been born just before or during the conflict. They learned to identify enemy plane silhouettes from school posters. Some were evacuated from cities to the countryside, living with strangers for their own safety. Others stayed, attending classes in half-destroyed buildings or makeshift shelters. Childhood under bombardment shaped an entire generation. Some felt robbed of normal experiences, others found resilience in adversity. Stories abound of kids playing in bomb craters or turning bits of shrapnel into toys. Their laughter echoed alongside wailing sirens, a haunting mixture of innocence and chaos. Yes, official histories record the major turning points, the strategies, and the leadership decisions. But when you sift through personal journals, letters, and local reports, the raw day-to-day reality emerges, full of heartbreak, ingenuity, heroism, and despair. Small moments of grace coexist with unimaginable horror. This was more than just a clash of armies. It was a colossal upheaval that permeated every aspect of life, from the biggest global powers down to a lone child hugging a battered teddy bear in a darkened bomb shelter. Close your eyes for a second and imagine the hushed corridors of a government office, somewhere behind the front lines. Typists clack away on heavy mechanical keyboards, churning out memos labeled "Top Secret." Suit-clad officials gather around a long wooden table, their voices low yet urgent. They're examining intercepted documents and spy reports that hint at something terrifying: activities in remote detention camps, rumored mass graves, and whispered stories of people disappearing by the trainload. Those rumors were not always easy to prove, but pieces of evidence piled up. Some officials felt a moral shock, while others tried to pretend it had nothing to do with them. The cruelty overshadowed any twisted notion of just following orders. Yet in the midst of the war's fury, these crimes often stayed on the periphery of public awareness. It was a horrifying reality that still staggers the conscience. Stepping away from those dark secrets, think of the forced labor that spread across many territories. Conquered populations were made to work in factories, mines, and farms under harsh conditions, often guarded by armed personnel. Some were dragged from their homes, shoved onto trucks or trains, told they were needed for essential work. Families got torn apart this way. In certain industrial zones, men and women labored long hours until they collapsed, producing weapons, vehicles, or constructing bunkers and roads that served the war machine. Fleeing was almost impossible. Surveillance was everywhere. Some tried to sabotage equipment, but the risk of brutal punishment loomed, so they toiled, day in and day out, with meager rations and constant fear. Even decades later, survivors carried deep scars, both physical and emotional. At the same time, entire engineering teams in the heart of some countries were busy developing new rocket technologies. Their facilities were often hidden in mountainsides or thick forests, guarded heavily. Unmanned missiles were tested, sometimes crashing into fields or villages that had no idea what was falling from the sky. Local residents told tales of strange streaks of smoke overhead, followed by thunderous blasts. Governments tried to keep these programs under wraps, punishing anyone who leaked information. Meanwhile, captured laborers were forced to assemble the parts under appalling conditions. If you look at post-war photos of these secret complexes, you'll see half-finished tunnels, rusted machinery, and haunting graffiti scratched into walls by those who lived and died there. These locations stand as grim reminders that technological leaps often came at a grave human cost. In the background, there were hearts still beating with hope. Underground organizations worked frantically to gather proof of atrocities, collecting witness accounts and smuggled letters. They hoped the evidence would one day hold oppressors accountable. Some risked their lives to photograph barbed wire fences or mass graves, using hidden cameras built into coat buttons or cigarette cases. Couriers then slipped this evidence across borders, disguised as mundane items or disguised in coded text. Often, the route to deliver these materials spanned multiple countries, passing through many hands. A single slip meant capture and possible execution. Yet they persisted, believing the world had to know. Many of these documents vanished, but some survived, shaping war crime trials in later years. Look at the skies again, not just for bombers, but for cargo planes dropping relief packages to isolated pockets of resistance fighters. These airdrops were lifelines of food, medicine, and sometimes small arms or ammunition. Parachutes of various colors popped open against gray clouds, floating crates down into forests or valleys. Crews back at the airfields often had no idea who exactly would retrieve the cargo. They just knew these supplies were requested by coded radio signals from behind enemy lines. In many places, locals sprinted to snatch the crates before patrols arrived. There was an art to hiding parachutes so they wouldn't tip off the authorities. Children too young to fight sometimes helped gather and conceal dropped goods, feeling a surge of pride to be part of something bigger. It was an invisible thread connecting distant allies in a common cause. And how about the heartbreaking phenomenon of child evacuees? Tens of thousands were sent across borders or even overseas, sometimes with handwritten tags pinned to their coats stating their names and a contact address. Parents hoped this would keep them safe from bombings or invasions. Many children ended up living with foster families for years, speaking new languages, adapting to foreign customs. Some grew close to their hosts, while others felt lost and lonely, pining for news of home. When the war finally shifted or ended, reuniting these families was a challenge. Addresses had changed or entire neighborhoods no longer existed. Heart-wrenching stories emerged of children returning to find no trace of their old houses or parents. Even in relief, heartbreak lingered. Small but mighty craft soared on specialized missions too, liaison aircraft that could land on tiny airstrips or even farmland, bringing in key officers or whisking out wounded soldiers. These planes resembled flimsy wings with an engine strapped on, vulnerable to even light arms fire. Pilots had to be daredevils, touching down on rough ground under the threat of ambush. Yet these flights were often the fastest way to relay crucial orders or rescue downed pilots behind enemy lines. Some missions used camouflage paint jobs to blend with the landscape, while others flew so low they risked clipping treetops just to dodge radar detection. Despite the danger, these sorties saved countless lives and carried out feats that official planners initially deemed impossible. In the realm of espionage, you had double-cross systems, where captured enemy agents were turned against their masters. They'd send back misleading updates under the watchful eye of counterintelligence officers. One false message could steer entire divisions to the wrong coast or persuade a navy to deploy ships in worthless patrol areas. Playing this game required a flair for psychological manipulation, convincing the enemy that their agent was still loyal, even as the agent provided twisted intel. Meanwhile, in some neutral territories, entire spy rings operated from fancy hotels or quiet cafes. Patrons sipping coffee might be exchanging coded greetings, while the staff pretended not to notice. These neutral zones teemed with watchers and informers from both sides, locked in a subtle contest that rarely made headlines but could shake the battlefield outcomes. In major cities that had fallen under occupation, daily life took on a surreal quality. Military police patrolled streets and demanded ID papers at random. Curfews shut everything down after dark. Shops were commandeered, resources siphoned away. Some citizens grudgingly cooperated to keep a semblance of normalcy. Others formed quiet pockets of resistance. Underground newspapers circulated with stories of hope, sabotage successes, and coded instructions. Every day was a gamble. Speak out and risk arrest or deportation. Keep silent and live under a regime you despise. Many tried to maintain small rituals, like celebrating a holiday in secret, or marking a child's birthday with a single hidden candle. Those little acts of defiance served as a reminder that identity and culture wouldn't be erased so easily. Think of the frontline improvisations, too. Tank crews sometimes welded extra metal scraps onto their hulls for added protection, though it often strained engines beyond their limits. Infantrymen crafted homemade grenades from tin cans and dynamite sticks. In colder regions, they burned anything combustible to stay warm, from furniture in abandoned houses to entire forests in dire circumstances. Soldiers trapped behind enemy lines looted whatever they could to keep going. This war of resourcefulness demanded quick thinking. A single cooking pot might serve as a helmet, wash basin, soup kettle, and bucket. Cloth scraps from parachutes could be turned into bandages or camouflage netting. The front demanded adaptability at every turn. Meanwhile, vast bureaus of censorship sprang up. Letters from soldiers were screened, with censors blacking out any detail that might give away positions or strategies. Newspapers faced strict guidelines. One misstep, and an editor could be hauled in for questioning. Radio announcements were carefully orchestrated, with official statements replacing free debate. Pamphlets about rationing or civil defense hammered away at citizens, reminding them of their duty. Even jokes could be censored if they mocked the wrong person or policy. In some places, people developed coded slang or subtle hints to share truths they couldn't write outright. For instance, an offhand remark about plenty of fish in the sea might mean submarines sank another convoy last week. It was a precarious dance between staying informed and staying safe. Have you heard of the traveling theater groups that performed for troops in far-flung locations? They lugged costumes, sets, and instruments across bomb-riddled roads, determined to bring a laugh or a tear to soldiers starved for normalcy. These performers risked ambushes and air raids, sometimes diving for cover mid-rehearsal if an enemy plane roared overhead. But for a few magical hours, men and women in uniform could forget the mud, the blood, the gnawing hunger. They'd clap, sing along, or holler at the comedians on stage. In that fleeting moment, the war felt distant. Some entertainers returned home with stories of entire audiences in tears at the first notes of a familiar song, tears of longing, relief, and an ache for simpler times. Even as the front lines raged, diplomatic channels kept flickering with secret messages. Certain ambassadors strove to secure deals that might lessen the severity of the fighting or protect their nationals abroad. Cloaked negotiations sometimes led to localized ceasefires, brief lulls that let both sides gather their wounded or exchange prisoners. These short truces could be a godsend for medics overwhelmed by casualties. Yet not all ceasefires lasted. Suspicion ran deep, and a single shot could reignite the madness. Officials holed up in foreign embassies typed out coded telegrams around the clock, using ciphers that took months to crack, if they were cracked at all. Some telegrams reached the desk of heads of state who weighed every word before deciding whether to keep fighting or seek a broader peace. In parallel, moral debates raged. How far was too far in pursuit of victory? Some believed that striking civilian centers with bombings was a necessary evil. Others condemned it as barbaric. Leaders weighed the impact on morale and production, choosing targets that would cripple an enemy's war machine, but at terrible cost to the population. Headlines back home often framed these bombings as heroic or essential, glossing over the human cost. Over time, entire cities were reduced to twisted metal and ash. Survivors wandered among the wreckage, searching for missing loved ones under collapsed buildings. And once the rubble was cleared, if it ever was, tales emerged of entire families buried alive, rescue attempts that came too late, and neighborhoods turned to dust. This is the haunting underside of strategies planned on polished tables far away. And then there was the murky realm of collaboration. In territories under occupation, some locals aided the occupying forces for personal gain or survival. They might identify resistance members, betray neighbors, or seize property. This created bitter divides that lingered long after the war. Others collaborated reluctantly, coerced under threats to their families. Still, the line between forced cooperation and voluntary betrayal blurred in the chaos. When the occupiers eventually withdrew or were defeated, these collaborators often faced violent reprisals. Communities turned on them, and retribution was brutal. Sometimes, innocents got swept up in the backlash. The wounds of these betrayals cut deep, poisoning local relationships for generations. In makeshift war rooms, you'd find huge maps plastered on walls, Colored pins marked friendly or enemy positions, moving daily as front lines shifted. Generals pointed at critical roads or rivers, discussing how to secure them. Then they'd step outside to face a crowd of reporters, spinning a carefully crafted tale of progress. But behind closed doors, they fretted over supply shortages, shaky alliances, and moral questions they rarely voiced in public. The gap between official optimism and private dread was enormous. Soldiers on the ground often joked that the folks in charge lived in a different universe, one where red and blue pins decided life or death without seeing the human faces behind them. In the thickest fighting, all that mattered was the brother or sister next to you. Soldiers formed bonds that defied prejudice. They shared the last cigarette, the last swig of water, the last letter from home. Some wrote each other's families, making sure no news was lost if one of them fell. They invented code words for urgent situations, like a certain nickname that meant, "We're out of ammo, get help now," or a silly catchphrase that meant, "Retreat immediately." Camaraderie blended with raw survival instincts, forging memories that would never be forgotten. And sometimes, small differences, like a language barrier or a background, just vanished in the heat of combat. All that remained was a primal need to protect and endure. This total war turned entire oceans, skies, and lands into deadly arenas. Submarines stalked convoys in the cold Atlantic swells. Guerrillas ambushed patrols in humid jungles. Fighters dogfought among clouds that glowed orange with tracer fire. Everywhere, the pattern repeated: attack, counterattack, desperation. Civilians sought shelter in caves or basements, hoping the storm would pass. Some had no choice but to keep working in fields or factories through air raids, because if they didn't, they'd starve. A numbness set in after witnessing so much destruction. People often said, "We just have to carry on," even though exhaustion was etched into their eyes. The line between front line and home front blurred as the war took on a life of its own, unstoppable until it finally burned itself out. Picture a cold, drizzly morning where distant artillery thunder echoes across muddy fields. Soldiers trudge forward, rifles slung, boots caked in wet earth. Their breath forms tiny clouds in the damp air. Some cough, worn out by endless nights of fitful sleep in rat-infested trenches. But they keep going, driven by orders and the faint hope that maybe today won't be as terrible as the last. In a corner of this vast conflict, an infantry company prepares for what commanders call a probing attack, meant to test the enemy's strength. The tension is thick. They know the enemy lines are dotted with hidden machine gun nests and mortar emplacements. If they can capture even a small ridge, it might shift the balance in this sector. But everyone dreads what lurks ahead, uncertain if they'll live to see nightfall. Back at a field headquarters, the officers stand over a map spread on a rickety table. A single lantern flickers, casting shadows that dance across worried faces. The muddy footprints of runners and dispatch riders streak the floors, and the air smells of damp wool, stale coffee, and burning tobacco. Somebody mentions intelligence about fresh enemy reinforcements. Another insists their own men have gone too long without proper rest. Arguments flare, but there's no time to dwell on misgivings. Artillery support gets timed down to the minute. Shelling will lift, and the troops must charge forward. The plan is etched in chalk on the map, soon to be tested in blood and grit. Meanwhile, in a bunker not too far away, the opposing side's officers review their own defenses. They pass around battered field glasses, surveying barbed wire entanglements and improvised obstacles. Trees are shorn of leaves by previous shelling, leaving the terrain bare and haunting. Snipers lurk among the splintered trunks. The defenders brace themselves, adjusting gun positions, double-checking ammo reserves. If the enemy charges, they intend to hit back hard, aiming to repel any advance before it gains momentum. No one talks about what happens if they fail. There's an unspoken fear about what a breakthrough might mean for them. While these local maneuvers play out, far away in a major city, rows of gray government buildings loom under a drab sky. Inside, a swirl of bureaucrats, clerks, and uniformed staff hustle along marble halls. One office is in charge of allocating resources for the entire front. How many blankets, how many crates of rifles, how many new recruits can be shipped out this month. Another handles ration calculations for civilians, trying to keep bread lines from turning violent. Tense negotiations occur daily. Generals clamoring for more fuel, local officials begging for supplies to prevent unrest in bombed neighborhoods. Papers shuffle from desk to desk, each signature dragging finite resources into one sphere or another. It's a kind of hidden battle, fought with spreadsheets, stamps, and carefully worded memos, yet it impacts every soldier, every factory worker, every mother waiting for the next loaf of bread. In that same city, propaganda ministers spin stories that highlight any shred of positive news from the front. Photos are chosen carefully, a platoon smiling after a minor victory, or a tank rolling through a liberated village. Radio announcers recite glowing reports, burying tales of defeat or huge casualties. They emphasize unity, sacrifice, and heroism, hoping to keep morale afloat. The public devours these reports, some believe wholeheartedly, while others see through the hype. Whispers of real war news spread in underground coffee shops, where people share secondhand stories of battered regiments or entire divisions wiped out in a matter of days. Fear mixes with skepticism, and rumors breed in the secrecy forced by censorship. Beyond city limits, trains loaded with war material rumble through the countryside, guarded by armed escorts who scan the horizon for sabotage attempts. Resistance fighters might blow up a rail bridge or plant explosives on crucial supply routes. If a train derails, it can delay an offensive by days or even weeks. Locals living near the tracks sometimes hear the screech of metal on metal at night, followed by an orange glow in the distance, another sabotage success. In retaliation, occupying forces often crack down on nearby towns, rounding people up, demanding confessions. It's a grim cycle. Sabotage leads to reprisals, which stoke more hatred, which fuels more sabotage. Meanwhile, farmers in those regions struggle just to get crops to market without being accused of aiding rebels. Survival is a delicate balancing act. In the skies, night fighter squadrons scramble from remote airfields. They rely on radio direction finders and rudimentary radar to intercept enemy bombers. One pilot, strapped into his cockpit, peers at a dimly lit instrument panel. The engine roar vibrates through his bones as he ascends into a dark expanse. On a clear night, the glimmer of stars contrasts sharply with the bursts of flak and distant searchlight beams. Through his headset, a ground controller calmly reports blips on the screen. Altitude, heading, possible enemy location. Adrenaline floods him, and with sweaty palms, he toggles the gun sight, scanning for silhouettes in the moonlight. A single gun burst might decide if a bomber goes down or slips away to unleash bombs on a sleeping city. High above the world, these lethal dances unfold in near invisibility, with only tracer rounds and the glow of fire marking success or failure. Huddled below in improvised shelters, civilians wait out air raids. Basements transform into cramped dens of fear. Candles flicker against the walls, revealing anxious faces and the occasional tear-stained cheek. Mothers cradle toddlers who whimper at every rumble from above. Elderly neighbors recite comforting words, fragments of old prayers or lullabies. When the bombs drop, dust rains from the ceiling and the ground shakes as if alive. After the sirens end, a hush follows. People emerge to find entire blocks flattened. Rescue teams drag out survivors from the rubble, sometimes stumbling upon tragedies too devastating to describe. Exhausted volunteers form human chains, passing buckets of water to douse fires. It's a grotesque routine repeated in countless towns and cities. In the midst of it all, there are still small pockets of joy. Newlyweds gather in a battered church for a humble ceremony, with a chaplain who keeps his helmet nearby in case of an unexpected raid. A musician somewhere tries to salvage a piano from a wrecked concert hall, managing to coax out a few fragile notes that echo through broken windows. A teacher in a makeshift classroom scribbles on a chalkboard, hoping to bring a sense of normal life to children who can barely remember peacetime. These fragile sparks of humanity stand against the avalanche of chaos, reminding everyone that life goes on, even if it's overshadowed by daily danger. In yet another theater of war, thick jungles challenge soldiers with oppressive heat and unrelenting insects. Leeches cling to boots, while rotting vegetation tangles around ankles. Patrols learn to move silently, listening for the faint crack of a twig that might signal an enemy ambush. Soldiers risk tropical diseases like malaria or dengue, further sapping their strength. Helicopters, if available, struggle to land in dense foliage, so supplies sometimes come by boat along murky rivers infested with hidden hazards. Entire squads vanish in the green gloom, found only weeks later by follow-up patrols. The environment itself becomes an enemy, forcing tactics that differ drastically from open-field battles or urban warfare. Locals who know the terrain can become invaluable guides or cunning adversaries if they side with the opposing force. Meanwhile, on the diplomatic stage, some countries try to broker armistices or local peace deals. Envoys meet in neutral zones, exchanging polite handshakes that mask deep suspicion. Negotiations drag on for days, sometimes yielding a temporary halt in one area while fighting continues everywhere else. On the radio, leaders proclaim these negotiations as signs of progress, but the truth is often more complex. One side may just need time to regroup, while the other might be angling for territorial concessions. Hidden agendas swirl under the surface. For every agreement reached, another breaks down, fueling further cynicism among those directly under fire. And let's not forget the coastal regions, where amphibious raids or submarine landings create constant uncertainty. Local villagers might wake to find strange footprints in the sand, evidence that a covert team landed overnight. Fishermen get questioned by naval patrols, asked if they've seen suspicious vessels. Some get tempted into smuggling or exchanging secret messages for cash or supplies. The coastline becomes a stage for infiltration, rescue operations, or sabotage attempts on critical ports. A single mission could blow up a fuel depot, sabotage a radar installation, or snatch an enemy officer for interrogation. But success requires meticulous planning, stealth, and a fair bit of luck, because coastal defenses often bristle with barbed wire, mines, and floodlights. Back in large industrial centers, weapon designs keep evolving. Engineers refine new aircraft engines, experiment with better tank turrets, or fine-tune bombs that can pierce reinforced concrete. Factories run day and night, belching smoke that darkens the horizon. Workers operate heavy machinery under punishing schedules. Accidents are frequent, fingers crushed by metal presses, entire assembly lines going up in flames if a spark ignites flammable materials. Yet the pressure to meet production quotas never eases. Posters on factory walls urge everyone to work harder, faster, promising victory if they can just crank out a few more units each day. Inspectors roam the aisles, ensuring no one slacks off. The endless clatter of machinery forms a harsh soundtrack to the war effort behind the front. Soldiers on distant battlefields often send postcards or scribble short letters to relatives, hoping the mail makes it through. They might mention the weather, the food, or a funny incident with fellow troops, though rarely the reality of close calls and shattered nerves. Families at home cling to these glimpses of their loved ones, reading and rereading them. Some slip encouraging notes into care packages filled with homemade cookies, if flour is still available, warm socks, or small trinkets. However, the unpredictability of the mail system leads to heartbreak when letters arrive months too late or never arrive at all. Still, people keep writing as if the act itself is a lifeline. In parts of the world less touched by actual fighting, another invisible war unfolds: espionage and sabotage in factories, shipyards, or research labs. Agents pass microfilm or stolen blueprints, hoping to tip the technological scales. A single folder of data on advanced radar or rocket fuels might give an adversary an edge that alters entire campaigns. So authorities ramp up surveillance, questioning anyone who seems suspicious, sometimes locking up individuals based on ethnicity or mere rumor. Fear of infiltration grows. Posters warn citizens to watch what you say. Enemy ears are listening. This fosters paranoia, leading some to report innocent neighbors simply because they heard a strange accent or noticed odd comings and goings at night. For many, the war's moral dimensions become a daily torment. Medics struggle with the Hippocratic Oath when forced to treat enemy prisoners while their own comrades lie dying. Civilians wonder if buying black market food is worth risking accusations of treason. Judges face sham trials orchestrated by occupying forces or their own governments under emergency decrees. Clergy debate whether to publicly condemn atrocities, knowing it could bring violent retaliation on their congregations. Simple acts, like refusing to salute an occupying officer, can spiral into life-threatening confrontations. Yet these small moral stands sometimes spark larger movements, as people realize they share a collective disgust for cruelty. Courage isn't always about charging a machine gun nest. Often, it's about quietly defying inhumane orders at great personal risk. Even in the final stretches of the war, illusions persist. Propaganda keeps touting unstoppable victory, even as entire armies collapse. Some leaders cling to fantasies of miraculous superweapons or alliances that never materialize. Soldiers sense the tide turning but can't openly voice their doubts. Deserters roam the countryside, hoping to find a safe haven before it's all over, sometimes forming ragtag bands that live off the land or prey on vulnerable locals. Civilians in once secure regions now face bombs dropping overhead for the first time. Those who dismissed the war as far away suddenly realize no place is truly safe in a global conflict. In the midst of all this, certain humanitarian groups try to protect civilians from the worst excesses. They set up safe corridors for refugees, negotiate prisoner exchanges, or deliver medical supplies to war-torn hospitals. But their efforts often meet stone walls. With so many shifting alliances and deep-seated grudges, getting both sides to agree on anything is a monumental task. Still, these groups push on, upholding principles that feel fragile in a world where might so often tramples right. In diaries, relief workers describe heartbreak when their missions fail, and elation when they manage to save even a handful of lives from imminent disaster. For those who survive, the memories sear their minds. Years later, they'll recall the hissing of shells overhead, the smell of cordite, the flicker of lanterns in a darkened shelter, the hiss of improvised gas masks, the gloom of blacked-out streets, and the hush after an air raid siren finally falls silent. Some recall the trembling hands of a frightened ally or the final glance of a comrade lost in the mud. Others remember the day they realized they'd surrendered basic morals in exchange for orders. And in post-war life, these men and women carry the weight of those experiences. Nightmares, regrets, silent trauma, these linger long after the treaties are signed. Yet while the war rages, no one knows exactly how it will end or when. The best they can do is face each challenge as it comes. Sometimes a glimmer of hope breaks through in small personal acts, like a soldier sharing rations with a hungry civilian, or an officer refusing to carry out a brutal directive. History books may focus on grand offensives and treaties, but these smaller choices in grim conditions define countless lives. They're the backbone of a story too sprawling for any single account, each moment a thread in a vast tapestry of conflict, woven with heartbreak, defiance, survival, and the stubborn spark of humanity. Feel the tension of a quiet dawn in a ruined city. Smoke from recent bombing still drifts across broken rooftops. A few exhausted survivors shuffle along cratered roads, trying to salvage anything useful. An old woman hunches over, sifting through rubble in search of her family's keepsakes. Maybe a photo album, a stray piece of jewelry that might help her barter for bread. Elsewhere, a stray dog roams the empty streets, dodging military patrols. In a corner once home to a bustling cafe, now just charred beams and shattered glass, a soldier sits on a damaged step, cradling a small tin mug of lukewarm coffee. He stares at the rubble, wondering if life will ever feel normal again. This is what the aftermath of a heavy assault looks like. Buildings reduced to skeletons, quiet except for the distant rumble of artillery. But outside the city, columns of trucks roll across battered highways. Troops shift uncomfortably in the cramped spaces, trying to catch a quick nap. Many vehicles carry improvised armor, sandbags or metal sheets welded to the sides to protect against roadside ambushes. The drivers have grown used to potholes and cratered bridges, forging ahead slowly under the watchful eye of guard vehicles in front and behind. Convoy commanders fret over partisan attacks, roadside bombs, or even enemy aircraft spotting them from above. Yet these long lines of trucks remain vital arteries for ammunition, rations, spare parts, and fresh boots on the ground. If a convoy fails to arrive, entire units at the front can fall apart in a matter of days. In a hidden clearing near a thick forest, a group of ragged partisans readies for a raid at dusk. They've built their camp deep among the trees, using camouflage nets to hide from aerial reconnaissance. Weapons are a mismatched collection of old rifles, captured machine guns, and homemade explosives. Their leaders hold quiet discussions by lantern light, finalizing the plan to disrupt enemy transport routes. Some in this group are local farmers who lost their lands. Others are former soldiers cut off from their retreating armies. A few are just teenagers, fueled by anger after losing family in the fighting. By nightfall, they'll slip onto roads, set up booby traps, or ambush small patrols. They know they can't go head-to-head with large forces, but each attack frays the enemy's nerves, sowing chaos that might tip the balance over time. Across the sea, massive warships lie at anchor in an ever-shifting naval chessboard. Crews scurry across decks, handling complex tasks like resupplying fuel, mounting fresh anti-aircraft guns, or loading torpedoes with care. In the engine rooms, sweat-drenched sailors maintain giant turbines that power these steel giants. Commanders in the bridge keep an eye on coded signals from high command, bracing for orders that could send them into battle at any moment. A single engagement between these dreadnoughts can decide control of key shipping lanes, and controlling those lanes can determine if factories stay stocked or if frontline units starve for supplies. So the tension never lifts. Any day, a rival fleet might appear on the horizon, and the calm harbor could erupt into a swirling melee of shells and fire. Meanwhile, in the hush of an underground laboratory, scientists tinker with radio frequencies, chemical agents, and advanced propulsion concepts. Every so often, a test goes wrong. A small explosion rattles the thick walls, and workers scramble to contain toxic fumes. These facilities often run around the clock, locked away from prying eyes. Guards armed with submachine guns patrol the perimeter, scanning for spies or saboteurs. Researchers wrestle with moral doubts, but many press on, driven by the knowledge that if they don't, their adversaries might crack the next breakthrough first. Rumors swirl among lab assistants about an ultimate device or unstoppable weapon. Nobody knows if these whispers are real or just fear-fueled gossip. But the drive for technological supremacy presses forward, no matter the risk. Step into a remote mountain village where the war seems distant, yet it's never truly far away. Farmers herd goats along narrow trails, while watchful eyes track any approaching strangers. Sometimes, foreign soldiers pass through on scouting missions. The villagers offer water or a place to rest, weighing caution against kindness. Deals can be struck, fresh produce traded for a guarantee of safe passage. But trust is fragile. If a rival patrol shows up next week, the same villagers might face reprisals. Posters in the local chapel warn against hiding fugitives or hoarding supplies. Whispers circulate about a downed pilot sheltered in a barn or a hidden stash of contraband. Life goes on in a tense equilibrium, with everyone striving to appear neutral while quietly picking a side, or just trying to survive until the chaos ends. Officers at major command hubs track multiple fronts using coded reports. A bleary-eyed aide rushes in with urgent dispatches from a battered front line. Casualties are rising, morale is dipping, ammo supplies are critical. The men at the table exchange worried looks. Another front screams for reinforcements. The phone rings with fresh intelligence that the enemy might launch a surprise attack in the north. Someone else says shipping routes are under heavier submarine threat than expected. Balancing these crises becomes like juggling flaming torches. Drop one, and an entire army could collapse. In desperation, some leaders order questionable offensives, hoping to stun the enemy into retreat or at least buy time to reorganize. Others prefer defensive stands, gambling on the idea that they can wear the opposition down. Disagreements flit through these rooms daily, shaped by personal ambition, strategic logic, or raw desperation. On the cultural front, radio dramas and traveling performers try to keep spirits from buckling. Some shows feature comedic sketches that mock the enemy leaders. Others highlight heroic stories of frontline nurses or everyday families coping with blackouts. These broadcasts are more than just entertainment. They're part of the morale machine that governments rely on to keep the population engaged. Listeners huddle around radios, savoring each minute of distraction from the gloom outside. But not all voices get a platform. Reports of mass deportations, forced relocations, or brutal crackdowns never reach mainstream airwaves, too damaging for official narratives. So in hidden corners, resistance press or clandestine radio stations broadcast the darker news. Listeners have to fiddle with dials at odd hours, catching faint signals from transmitters hidden in barns or attics, guarded by individuals who risk their lives for the truth. Among soldiers returning from brief respite, you'll hear hushed talk of rumored super soldiers or unstoppable enemy divisions. Fear can amplify any tale, making each rumor more vivid and terrifying. Commanders do their best to squash panic, giving pep talks that highlight the enemy's weaknesses. But stories spread like wildfire in the cramped quarters of barracks or troop transports. A single whisper, perhaps about a new terror weapon that melts tank armor, can lower confidence and readiness. In response, psychological operations gear up, planting counter-rumors or staging dramatic stunts to prove the enemy's myths are false. Sometimes these tricks work, other times the seeds of doubt remain. War isn't just about bullets and shells, it's also about the headspace of every person involved. In certain areas, displaced populations form sprawling refugee camps. Canvas tents stretch across fields turned muddy by rain, each shelter housing a story of loss. People line up for thin soup from communal kitchens. Children cling to mothers with hollow eyes. Disease can sweep through these camps faster than any frontline skirmish. Relief agencies do what they can, bringing in doctors, latrines, basic schooling for the kids, but they're overwhelmed. Supplies never seem enough, and looming overhead is the constant worry that shifting front lines might swallow the camp in the next surge of combat. Evacuation might be the only option, but that requires transport and safe corridors, neither of which is guaranteed. So thousands wait day after day for good news that rarely comes. Farther away, in quieter countries, people try to carry on normal life, attending dances, going to cinemas, sipping coffee in bright cafes. But even there, the war's shadow looms. Soldiers on leave might wander city streets with haunted expressions. Government posters encourage everyone to donate blood or send care packages to the troops. Factories in these nations often ramp up production to supply allies or to stockpile for their own defense. Some citizens protest, feeling their government should remain completely neutral. Others passionately support the war effort, organizing rallies for volunteers. Spies roam these places, recruiting sympathizers or funneling resources. Safe houses shelter escapees from occupied regions, while contraband shipments flow through ports under the nose of overworked customs agents. So even in spots that seem calm, the conflict's pulse can be heard just beneath the surface. Meanwhile, the war's pace drives remarkable feats of engineering. Makeshift airstrips pop up in fields, built by bulldozers in record time. Mechanized bridges unfold across rivers, allowing tanks and trucks to cross where no permanent bridge stands. Medics set up forward aid stations that can be collapsed and moved within hours. Communication lines, telephone, telegraph, or radio relays get laid down or torn up as battles shift. It's a race to stay flexible, to build or destroy infrastructure faster than the enemy can react. Entire routes open and close within days, turning what was once a stable region into a fluid mosaic of control. Cartographers scramble to update maps, but sometimes troops move so fast they outpace official map revisions. Confusion can erupt when squads rely on outdated information, wandering into enemy-held zones by mistake. In top-level political circles, alliances teeter on the edge. Some leaders suspect their partners might cut a secret deal with the enemy if the situation grows dire. Diplomats exchange icy pleasantries, all too aware that today's ally can be tomorrow's betrayer. Statements of unity fill the press, while behind the scenes, envoys quietly explore backup plans, just in case. Smaller nations, caught in the middle, must weigh risky choices, side with a bigger partner, or try to remain on the fence. The war has a habit of punishing indecision brutally. Countries that tried to stay neutral often found themselves invaded or coerced. So each government tries to read the shifting winds, hoping to pick the winning side or at least mitigate catastrophe. It's a high-stakes game with entire populations in the balance. Science fiction becomes strangely relevant as scientists speculate on new possibilities, like guided missiles or advanced computing machines that can break codes in minutes. Some see these concepts as hope for a quick resolution. Others dread the implications of pushing technology to extremes. A few brilliant minds defect from one side to another, hoping to share their discoveries with those they deem more humane, or simply seeking better funding and safer conditions. This brain drain sparks frantic attempts to protect or kidnap valuable researchers. Plans are hatched to whisk top scientists out of harm's way, smuggling them across front lines or forging false papers to slip them through immigration checkpoints. Knowledge becomes a currency more precious than gold. Among rank-and-file troops, certain folk remedies spring up. Some swear that chewing coffee beans helps them stay alert on long patrols. Others carry lucky charms, letters from sweethearts, small religious icons, or a bullet plucked from a comrade's vest. Barracks humor prevails, men teasing each other about snoring, boots that never dry, or that dreadful canned stew. Yet behind the banter, there's an undercurrent of exhaustion. Soldiers who have fought through multiple campaigns carry an invisible burden. The new recruits, still naive, might see them as hardened experts, but those veterans know the ugly side of everything. They've lost too many friends, seen too much ruin. In letters home, they rarely talk about these dark realities, keeping a brave face for families who yearn to hear that they're all right. Behind city walls, black markets flourish. You can find rationed items at steep prices: sugar, coffee, spare engine parts, even penicillin. Gangs or corrupt officials sometimes control these channels, making themselves rich off desperate people. Military police do their best to crack down, but the trade is too widespread. A single tin of condensed milk can fetch a fortune if you know the right people. It's a cruel twist. While frontline fighters risk life and limb, black market profiteers slip under the radar, enjoying luxuries unavailable to the general populace. Of course, they also risk being denounced or exposed by rivals. In a war that demands everyone's cooperation, black markets are tolerated by some who see them as the only way to get essential goods. Morality gets skewed, and survival takes priority. In areas just liberated from occupation, euphoria often breaks out. Citizens pouring into the streets, tearing down enemy flags, hugging soldiers they see as saviors. But the excitement can be short-lived. Shortages persist, destroyed infrastructure stifles recovery, and local collaborators spark ugly reprisals. Military government or transitional authorities try to restore order, but resentment brews if changes come too slowly. "You saved us. Now what?" people ask. Rebuilding is daunting when entire factories lie in ruins, farmland is riddled with landmines, and half the population is displaced. Still, for many, anything is better than living under hostile rule. So they roll up their sleeves, reopen shops in damaged buildings, patch roads, or volunteer in clinics. The sight of returning refugees stirs hope, but also heartbreak when they discover gutted homes or missing relatives. And overshadowing everything is the question of how it will finally end. Some foresee a slow grind, with one side gradually overpowering the other. Others imagine a sudden collapse when an enemy capital is taken or a key alliance unravels. People talk about secret negotiations or the possibility of an armistice that might come out of nowhere. Civilians who've endured years of shellfire dare to dream of peace, even if it's uncertain and fragile. Soldiers wonder if they'll make it home alive, or if the next offensive will be their last. A sense of collective fatigue grips nations, but as long as leaders keep pushing for advantage, or insisting on total victory, there's no easy way out. So the gears keep turning, fueled by fear, ambition, revenge, and the flickering belief that someday, maybe soon, this nightmare will relent.